It is. All right. Well, thank you very much. All right. Three, two, one. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is old Uncle Randy, and I again on a beautiful December day am privileged to share some time and thoughts with our good friend out in California, Mr. Robert Mills, on his series that the things that people believe that just ain't true. And we're going to sit and sort out some new facts that's post-election. And of course, Robert is a distinguished human being that climbs mountains the size that you see. He has climbed the one that's behind him, and but about 56 others. And he is puts a lot of research into what is upcoming. And since the post-election era is here between now and the January 20th. Robert has some ideas he'd want to share. And anyway, Robert, welcome.
Thank you, Randy. It's always a delight to be with you.
You
Love these
too. Thank you. I appreciate, I know you put a lot of time and effort, and I know you've been fighting the cold as both of us have. And anyway, I'm looking forward to today. Now that the election is over, I know you had some thoughts and, spun you around in bed a couple nights. So please do let's go forward.
Well, thank you, Randy. Well, folks, I got a great podcast for you today. So you're going to enjoy that. Stick with us. You will enjoy it. I want to give you a spoiler alert, okay? Because what we're going to talk about here and what you're going to learn is why most of the great notorious promises that the incoming Trump administration has been saying for months that they're going to do are never going to happen, ever. Okay. And you're going to learn about it here. Okay. So as we head toward the countdown to President-elect Trump's inauguration on the 20th, not only here in the US, but all over the world, there's this increasing fascination with and the focus on these sweeping, extraordinary promises that he's made throughout the campaign. It keeps making about what he's going to do on day one. Okay, many of these are quite sweeping and astonishing, and they're unlike any other incoming presidential election ever. Trump's MAGA supporters are very happy with that. They're very eager and looking forward to seeing these unprecedented changes happen. Okay. But I got a spoiler alert, as I said, for you on this podcast, okay? The most dramatic and highlighted changes and actions are not going to happen, okay? And you're going to learn here right now in this podcast why almost none of these President-elect Trump's most notorious promised actions are ever going to happen, ever. And I'm going to identify these promises here next, one by one, and explain why precisely each of them is dead on arrival and cannot be achieved. In the past, most newly elected presidents have used the interval between their election in November and their swearing in on January 20th to mend fences, to aggressively reach across the aisle out to the American people and to the broader public and rally support for their cause. Why do they do that? Okay, well, they do it because they recognize that to accomplish almost anything in Washington, you need help, a lot of help, and you need goodwill. You need it from both sides, and you need it from your own party. However, unlike any incoming president in American history, Trump has taken the opposite approach. Instead of reaching across the aisle and appealing to our patriotism as Americans, as all prior presidents elects have done, Trump has continued to belittle and threaten and bully those who have disagreed with me in both parties. Okay, why is this important now? And the answer is because American presidents, excuse me, have very limited power, much less actually than almost any other leader in the world. Our founding fathers were deeply wary and afraid of executive power. This is pretty obvious. You read any of the stuff that happened in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. They had seen what happened with kings and other leaders and executive power for centuries in other countries, which is often to abuse it. So they went out of their way in the Constitution, to repose most of the power and authority of the federal government, the great bulk of it, in an independent elected legislative branch, Congress. That's the one they trusted, okay? And they gave it the authority to tax and spend, which was the big authority. And they gave a lot of the rest of it to the courts. And the executive branch in the United States, the decision-making of it, is further profoundly dispersed in our federal government in the form of numerous independent commissions like the FAA and the FTC and the FDA and the Federal Reserve and the military and dozens of other nonpartisan bodies, each with independent, important decision-making power outside the purview of the president. American presidents have just very little discretionary power. Thus, to achieve anything, an American president has to weld his or her most powerful power. And it's one of the most powerful powers of many different offices. It's the power of persuasion. And that's why presidential popularity, goodwill, and support for a president's agenda are so vitally important. Many people see that Trump and the Republicans now control the presidency, and they got the majority in both houses, and they assume that that means that they can impose their will because they have the majority, right? Wrong. It does not mean that. Bear with me. Let's start with legislation. We all know that to get laws passed by Congress requires the approval of both houses of Congress, called a bicameral legislature. But there's this right to filibuster in the Senate. This is this quirky, anti-democratic procedural provision that came from the civil rights era that provides that if either side opposes a piece of legislation, excuse me, they can filibuster it. And to get that legislation passed, those in favor have to get 60 votes in the Senate. Thus, even if the Republicans have the majority in the Senate, and they do, and even if Trump can get all of his Republican senators to support him in a piece of legislation, and that's far from certain, he's still going to be 7 votes short of 40 votes that were required to impose and to get any piece of legislation passed that's opposed, okay? Thus, without Democratic support in the Senate, he can't pass any laws or legislation at all, nothing. And that takes away an enormous amount of options that he might otherwise have. There are a host of other obstacles which effectively block Trump's ability to take the major action he claims he's going to do on day one. And let's have some fun now and go through these. I'm going to call them specific. I'm going to call them the big promises, okay? They're the promises Trump has made, and I'm going to tell you why they're not going to happen, okay? Let's begin with the easiest big promise that ain't going to happen, and that's Trump's promise, which he keeps making this weekend even, that he's going to repeal birthright citizenship on day one. Now, what is birthright citizenship? It's the provision that if a person is born in the United States, they are automatically and irrevocably a citizen of the United States and entitled to all the protections of a citizen. And one of the practical things that means is that if an immigrant family comes here and has a kid here, that kid is an American citizen, okay? It has the same rights as you and I, Randy. And it wasn't always so. In 1857, the United States Supreme Court ruled in this infamous case of Dred Scott versus Sanford that a Black person, even one born right here in the U.S., is not a person under the Constitution. They have no rights. They are merely property. They were property. And thus they and their children could never, ever become citizens, even if they were born here. After the Civil War, in 1866, Congress passed the 14th Amendment, which was ratified by the states in 1868. It repealed the Dred Scott decision and provided that, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. are citizens of the United States and entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, period. Note that there's nothing in that 14th Amendment language or any other provision in the Constitution, if you look at it, that says a peep about the president's authority over birthright citizenship, because he doesn't have any. Thus, no president can do anything to change or modify the citizenship of any person born or naturalized in the United States. And of course, you know that to amend the Constitution, which they could, in theory, could be done to change that, to repeal birthright citizenship, that's going to require 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the state legislatures.
Never going to
That
happen.
ain't gonna happen. Now, in light of his oft-repeated threat to repeal it or eliminate, news organizations have all rushed out to solicit the views of many learned law professors and legal and constitutional scholars from all over the nation, all persuasions and parties, about what they view as the merit and feasibility of this promise to eliminate birthright citizenship. And every last one of them, I've watched them on TV, I'm sure you have too, unanimously have all expressed incredulity at this very notion, responding in the strongest terms that Trump has not a single shred of authority to do any such thing. And they all agreed that any purported attempt by the president on his own authority to unilaterally repeal it would be immediately and decisively struck down by the courts. Okay. So we can now add birthright citizenship to the first item on the list of things that Trump says he's going to do, but will never do. Hang on, there's more coming here. But we got that one taken care of. There is not going to be a repeal of birthright citizenship. Okay, it is noteworthy. I'll close on this point about birthright citizenship. That in his rallies, Trump has repeatedly said. I saw him say this weekend. I think that. The United States is the only country in the world that allows birthright citizenship. Okay, I'm sure it will not come as a shock to you to know that this too is a lie. And I didn't have the chance to go out and check, but I did check, and I found that Mexico has birthright citizenship, Canada has birthright citizenship, Brazil has birthright citizenship, Argentina. So right here in our neighborhood, the biggest countries. I don't think you can check out the others, but you get the point. It ain't so. But you know, he can say we live in this post-truth age now, where Trump can say anything, and even if it's facially false, and nothing. Reporters don't care, and nothing really comes of it. Okay. So next, let's go to number 2 here: his threat to go after and prosecute his political opponents and those who have disagreed with him or crossed him in some way in the past. He's, a number of his nominees for FBI, Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, his nominee for the Department of Justice, they've all been making this claim that they're going to go after these people. And it's been made by numerous other people. And this is one of the most disturbing claims made by this incumbent. They're going to go after people who are just political opponents on the other side of the aisle. Okay. And both Patel and Bondi have promised to go after these opponents. And Patel wrote a book in 23 called Government Gangsters, okay? And in that book, he identifies a whole bunch of, I think it was at least 60, that he said must be prosecuted. And these included even innocent witnesses in the congressional January 6th investigations because they dared to testify. Numerous other persons in this incoming years have added people to this enemies list. And one of the New York Times columnists posted and I forgot to print it, but there's now quite a lengthy list of enemies that he's going. And Trump himself has said, I'm going to appoint a quote real special counsel to go after the Biden crime family. Okay, and they have identified people such as Nancy Pelosi as targets, and others. The Trumps, Anthony Fauci, they want to criminalize the doctors, for what they claim is a funding research in China that led to the lab leak that caused the COVID virus. And now he's gone to recently, in the last week or so, we're talking about adding news organizations to the list to be persecuted enemies list. Okay, so what about these promises? Okay, can and will any of these targeted individuals be criminally prosecuted by the new Trump regime? The short answer, no, not a chance. Okay, why? Well, there's been a long and fascinating history of the abuse of criminal law and prosecutorial power. It goes all the way back to the Greeks, all over the world, to ancient times, And the abuses of royal and religious authority led the British Parliament in the 17th century to enact a bunch of statutes that really came from Anglo-Saxon law, went back 800 years before that required a grand jury indictment by 24 persons. They were originally knights, but 24 persons before a person could be charged with a crime. In other words, it's effectively put a gate around the courthouse. And they said you can't even take a person in there and charge them until you can indict them by getting these 24 persons to find by admissible evidence that reasonable cause exists that an accused defendant has committed a specific identified statutory crime. You got to go there before you can even charge them. Okay. So how are you going to charge people who have done nothing but oppose him, you know? And of course, the defendant has no evidentiary burden to meet. And then after, assuming, you know, that there's this old saying among lawyers that a good prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. So some people say, well, he can get people indicted. Okay, but let's assume he does. Okay, then he goes to the petit jury, the 12 people that we're all familiar with, and each and every one of them unanimously he has to get past the judge first, and then each and every one of them has to find beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty each and every element of a specific identified statutory crime. Okay. And that trial has to take place in the jurisdiction where the defendant resides and where the crime was committed. Okay. Our founding fathers adopted this reform and they put it into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the first 10 amendments. And so because of those provisions and not for lack of trying, okay, the first Trump administration got nowhere trying to go against Hillary and many other defendants. So what I'm here to tell you now, though, is because of these ancient provisions that go way back, and they're in our Constitution, our founding fathers wisely placed them in our Constitution and in the Bill of Rights amendments, is that not a single one on these enemies lists is going to be criminally prosecuted. Not going to happen. Okay. Now let's distinguish here when I say that, okay, between a separate criminal accusation that somebody in a different context had a kilo of fentanyl in their trunk or they didn't pay their taxes or some other separate kind of thing. Those persons might be prosecuted for those crimes, but those are not for opposing. They're not for being on the enemies list for opposing crime. That's something wholly independent. And what I am saying is that this is a key distinction. And no one's going to be prosecuted. No one for the things they did or said that got them on the enemies list. That's the point of it. So no one can or will be prosecuted for their behavior in opposing Trump or his agenda, which is essentially all that any of these people on the enemies list are even accused of. So add number 2 to your list, folks, of the things that ain't ever going to happen. Okay, the criminal prosecution of Trump's political opponents who opposed him or his actions. Okay, number 3. Okay, seemingly in recognition of the reality of these criminal barriers we just talked about, we have started hearing from Trump and some of his supporters that the new administration is going to, quote, come after its enemies, including journalists, civilly, meaning suing them in civil court as opposed to charging them with crimes. You know, only the district attorney or the U.S. attorney can charge a person in the name of the people with a crime. Any person can sue another person, okay? But this is not going to work either, okay? I have a lot of experience in this. Next week on the 18th, I've been a lawyer for 50 years. And so in order to bring a civil suit, the plaintiff, the person who's bringing the suit, has got to show that the defendant committed some specific act or acts which are actionable in that jurisdiction, okay? They can't just be, he made faces at me. And they were committed and they harmed the plaintiff, the person who's bringing the suit. It's hard to imagine, okay, how a political opposition person can be framed, how political opposition itself can be framed in a lawsuit as something actionable. I can't imagine the court would be laughed out of court on it. And there are other barriers. The plaintiff must show, that's the person bringing the suit, that he or she has standing, meaning that they were specifically harmed in a narrow and in legally cognizable way by the defendant's specifically identified conduct, harmed financially, okay? That's essentially impossible on a win visa. Who's simply saying, I disagree with you, I think you're crazy, or all that. So uh, a number of these barriers or threshold showings or allegations must be made and proven in civil court in order for to go after anyone on the list. But none of these prerequisites, as you can clearly see yourself, I mean, can be met in any civil action against anyone on Trump's enemies list, okay? Now, paralleling the function of the role of a grand jury in criminal law, there are two common motions that can be made in a civil case, okay, that parallel that. One is called a demur. A demur is a motion that the defendant makes. It goes to the judge and says, look, judge, even if everything they said in that that complaint they filed against me, the lawsuit, is true, assume all of it's true, they don't identify or set forth a recoverable remedy under law. In other words, if you sue someone and say that they are ugly or made faces at you or they're Martian or they oppose you politically, that's just not actionable in any state or under any jurisdiction. And this would also apply if the defendant was accused of something that is actionable that happened before the statute of limitations is run on it. You know, if they ran into you 50 years ago in a car, it's too late, or 5 years ago. So you can file this demur, and the court has no choice unless it states a claim, but to throw it out. Okay, there's a further remedy that serves like the grand jury as a barrier to getting into court. And that's the motion for summary judgment. And it's similar to a demur, and it basically says if you can prove a single fact or facts among the list of elements that has to be proved, that you can show it cannot be proven, you know, as a matter of law, then the lawsuit itself falls and fails. So you can make a motion for summary judgment, and one of the examples that would be to say that you want to show the statute of limitations is run, okay? So you go and you make a motion, say everything is true, but statute of limitations is run, it goes nowhere. The court would grant it, and the Trumpers are locked out of the courthouse, okay? So all these are barriers. The demurs, motion for summary judgment, they're barriers to the new income administration, you know, suing people civilly. They're going to be locked out of the courthouse. Now, continuing to identify obstacles that would prevent Trump and his associates from suing people on his enemies list. All government office holders, I mean, this even includes the police, okay? And the great majority of the people on the enemies list are office holders, okay? They have broad immunities under law to civil liability. And it is if the acts that they were accused of occurred in the course and scope of their official duties. So if someone holds government office and they're sued, the government has to defend them, pay for the judgment rendered against them. And so if Hillary were sued, for example, for what she did as Secretary of State or as Senator, the Justice Department would have to defend her at taxpayers' expense. And if a judgment was rendered, she wouldn't pay it, the Treasury would, or the taxpayers would, okay? So if the taxpayers have to pay the defense and the judgment rendered for any of these people who are office holders, what is the point of them suing them? They're not going to be paying anything. It's the taxpayers will be. So even if they could win, they can't win. But this makes the whole thing further preposterous, okay? Now let's move on to journalists and the media for more obstacles here. Why it isn't going to happen, okay? There's this little impediment you've probably heard of called the First Amendment. And there's been a lot of litigation about the First Amendment over the years, you can imagine. There's one famous landmark case everybody should know about, happened in 1964. It's called the New York Times versus Sullivan. And it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court made a ruling that gave journalists partial immunity for defamations in speech about public figures, okay, which Trump and his commission would be. And held that even if the media or a journalist gets the facts wrong, and what they said was wrong, okay, about a public figure, they're still immune under this Supreme Court case, unless it can be shown by clear and convincing evidence that the journalists knew what they reported was false, and yet they deliberately, intentionally published it and said it anyway in reckless and wanton disregard of the truth. It's really easy to show that they didn't do that. First, you have to show it was wrong. But then you have to show that, and it's virtually impossible. Historically, in the cases that have been litigated under Sullivan, the defamed person suing the media always loses. Okay, so as you can see here from what we've been talking about, there's no way for this so-called revenge agenda to be successful, at least in terms of civilly or criminally suing enemies. Okay, so. Let's chalk up these reasons as to why the promise to go after him is not going to get anywhere. But that doesn't mean, and I want to emphasize this here, okay? It doesn't mean he's not going to try on the civil case. What does that mean? Trump is unique. I think he probably sued more people than any person in American history, maybe in the world. He sues everybody that mentions him, okay? He has filed over 4,000 lawsuits. Most members of the public, especially the MAGA supporters, have no idea about this. But the most important fact to bear in mind about it is he essentially lost every single last one of them. Okay, he lost every one of the defamations. Every single one of them was lost. Okay, and he's even got cases now pending against the Pulitzer Prize Committee for giving a Pulitzer Prize to the New York Times. He's got a case claiming that's defamation. Okay, so. If and when these cases are filed, okay, which they likely will be given his history, okay, we should take note that and this is something a lot of people, laymen don't know about, that when you go into federal court, there's this rule called Rule 11, okay, it's a very important rule. And it says that this is not a place to play games, the federal court. If you say something or your lawyer says something, no matter what it is, you better be able to show you have reason to believe it's true. You can't just say, well, I'm just speculating. It might be true. You have to show evidence that it is true, okay? And it provides that both attorneys and parties are liable to be sued if they, by the judge, be punished by the judge, if they cannot articulate probable cause to substantiate a reasonable factual basis for everything they say in court and allege in their lawsuits. Everything. Okay. If you can't point to that, then you're subject to Rule 11 sanctions, which includes, among other things, a fine. But almost always, the minimum is the court will make the plaintiff, pay for the defendant's attorney's fees. That's the number one sanction. Okay. So in the 4,000 civil cases that Trump has brought, nearly 100% of them were thrown out, not only because they didn't have any merit, but they couldn't cite any facts. Okay. Many, if not most of them, were dismissed pursuant to Rule 11 orders, meaning that Trump was ordered to pay defense counsel fees. Earlier this year, Trump's case against the New York Times was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay $400,000 to the New York Times to pay their attorney's fees. This follows a similar case that was dismissed in 2023, in which he was ordered to pay $300,000 to the New York Times to pay their attorney's fees under Rule 11 for bringing the frivolous lawsuit. Okay, and that was the Pulitzer Prize one. The New York Times was taken out of that. Okay, there are numerous others, and I would imagine, I haven't added this up yet, but I would imagine Trump has paid millions of dollars, not only to his own lawyers, but he's paid millions of dollars to people he sued and their lawyers because his cases were thrown out for being meritless. Okay. And he was forced to pay for it twice. Okay. And let's note in closing here, reemphasize one more time that Trump has never won a single one of these civil defamation lawsuits out of the 4,000, not a single one.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Robert, that just, going through my brain, there are just some guys you don't want in your football team.
I'm sorry, I ran out here. Say it again, please.
I said, there are just some kind of guys you don't want on your football team when you're out playing. Because they're going to be running their own plays, and they're going to be running, headlong into our good friend Kenny Howard every day, where he's going to get knocked back 15 yards. Just one of the honestly, I apologize for laughing, but how stupid do you have to be? How many times you got to go back and think, well, it'll work this time, and it
Well,
just,
it's malicious, and and I've heard people articulate that one reason why Biden is considering some blanket pardons is just to take people out of the ordeal of having to do it. I mean, even
right,
if you do it and win, it's still a lot of your time. It's still an ugly thing. And Trump does this to intimidate people. He does it to
right.
intimidate families. If you just even say my name, I'm going to sue you. And okay, I can live, I'm a billionaire, I can afford it, but it's going to make your life hell for years. And even if you win, you're right. So in summary, and I don't think it's just stupid, as you mentioned. I think it's cruel.
I'm sorry, I got to use the old Illinois terms that look to me. I mean, like, I don't know if something ain't working when I'm hitting my 7 iron. I don't know if I'm going to keep hitting my 7 iron that same way. If that ball's going out of bounds. So
Yes,
it just
yes.
is. It's just
Not only
humorous to
just
hear these
stupid,
statistics.
it's cruel, Randy. Just the cruelty of it. I mean, and the lack of decorum and civility and just meanness it's something that's qualities that are not things that should be admired in our society.
Well,
Um,
it's amazing just in the notes reading is that all Trump thinks he can do the first day is set aside the First and the 14th Amendment. Done. It's all done. You just give it over. We'll just do it that way. You
that's
know.
all it takes, set
Yeah.
aside the First and the 14th Amendment, and you're
Here, go.
there.
Somebody go find me the Constitution. I got some things I gotta use some whiteout. Maybe like he did that map of that hurricane that one time with that black magic marker. He
Yes,
just
that's
just scratch some things out and then put it back. And then go on from there. I'm surprised he hasn't claimed that he triumph of resurrecting Notre Dame. When he went over there. I mean, it's
oh
just
yeah,
just
take credit for the rehab.
just say anything, people will believe it. We have over 80 million people that'll believe anything he has to say. So
Well,
I want to go forward, but today I was listening to they reduced the election down to one topic. Why did he win? With all the fervor of everything he says, why did he win? And everybody says our grocery prices were too high. Grocery prices were too high. That's why he won. That's the one thing that most people, after all the dust settled, our grocery prices were too high. And if they went back and understood why they were that high, it lays back in Trump's lap anyway. But I don't
that's
know.
a good point.
It gets reduced down to um, I
I'm
don't
gonna I'm
go
gonna
go
come
ahead,
back.
Robert. Bring me some sanity. Tell me,
All right.
things that just ain't true.
Well, what I'm telling you as you're going through this list here is all these horrible, terrifying things he says he's going to do. And it should bring you some comfort, as it does to me and most Americans, is he's even going to do it. He's saying he's going
No.
to do it, but it ain't going to happen. Just like, why do people, I'm going to come back to the grocery thing here in a minute and
Yeah.
tell you what, that's important too. Okay. But let's just summarize here on this last round here that, um, you have to have a grand jury indictment is a prerequisite to filing a criminal case. And since you can't do that against enemies, his name's never going to get filed. Okay. And, even the ham sandwich thing, it means you still got to go to a petit jury. You got to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty, each and every element. It ain't going to happen. There isn't any. And then you have the Rule 11 issue with a civil part with we have motions for summary judgment, demurs. There is this massive protection around the courthouse that keeps these kinds of cases out, and they will keep him out. So you're now ready to keep, you have your scorecard to watch what happens next. Okay, so moving on, we're going to touch on a couple of other things here. Let's do one that's easy. Okay, we've been hearing for a long time about the word treason. A lot of Trumpers are saying, this person, that person is guilty of treason. They even said that about poor Fauci. Got to serve 5 administrations and save millions of people. He's guilty of treason. Okay. And this too, of course, as we all know, is nonsense. But treason is it's important to understand a little about it. It's got a long history of abuse around the world. Okay, our founding fathers were very aware of this also, and to head off this, they defined treason in the Constitution as only giving aid and comfort to enemies in the time of war, not anything against the our side, but only aiding the other side. And it takes two witnesses, independent witnesses. And the courts have long held, interpreting it, what treason means, is that there has to be, Congress has to pass a declaration of war against a country, and the treasonous person has to be aiding that country's army or country, okay, and giving aid and comfort to that country and its armies. And so there currently, right now, no outstanding declarations of war by Congress. So all this loose talk that you hear in the media about treason is nonsense, and that too is going nowhere. So you can add that to your list of things that ain't going to happen. Okay. Now we come to tariffs, and we're going to be coming back to your point about grocery prices. Okay, tariffs go back to the 18th century. That they were the practice that we learned about in high school called mercantilism, and that was where a little country, growing country like the United States, okay, back then, would impose tariffs on the goods of a bigger, more industrialized country like England to protect and nurture its young, strong, young, struggling small industries against the cheap flood of factory-made goods from its competitors. Okay, that's what mercantilism was for. Okay, so as to tariffs, the first thing that we want to note, okay, is they're not paid by the country against whom they're imposed. Okay, tariffs are nothing more than taxes on consumers in the country that imposed the tariffs.
Wait a minute. Trump told us that China paid billions of dollars of tariff money during his first 4 years, millions and billions, and never a dollar. He never understood it. Could not, no matter who told him. He just, he never talked to anybody ordering a bike from China to see what would happen when they tried to sell that in their store. It just.
There's a joke in the New York Times today about the price of his Bibles going up because of the tariffs. So economists in the media, of course, has rushed to the economists saying, well, what do you think about this way? And all these economists are just like, what? I mean, they're all dumbstruck. And they quickly point out that tariffs, if he does, he's got this massive 25% on Mexico and Canada. And they quickly point out, if he actually went through with that, it would cause massive layoffs and a huge surge of inflation and shortages and the depression, collapse of the GDP by 10 points or something. So I think my take on this, okay, why he keeps talking about it, is that this is the latest version of his 2016 pledge that I'm going to build this big, beautiful wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. Okay, this is what the tariffs are now. Mexico, there is no wall. Mexico didn't pay for anything. But I think his strategy here is to negotiate with these countries, okay, Canada, Mexico, and China. And they're already, I mean, Trudeau went right down to Mar-a-Lago, and the president of Mexico has had conversations with him. And so what his plan is here is he's going to negotiate some vaguely worded face-saving deal that involves these countries doing something that's vague and ambiguous. And then Trump will then loudly and shrilly declare victory and tout his incredible deal-making skills, take credit for a bunch of imaginary achievements like limiting illegal drugs, immigrants, and a bunch of other showy claims. And that'll be the end of it. And he'll be taking credit for it. And a lot of the people who will not notice the difference. But the bottom line is, for our purposes here today, is that this 25% tariffs promise is yet another promise that ain't never going to happen. Okay. So now let's go on to mass deportation. Okay. There are, as we all know, 13 million illegal immigrants in the United States. And Trump also said he's going to use the U.S. military to do these mass deportations. Okay. Neither of these things are ever going to happen. And so let's talk about talk about this, okay? To give you an idea of 13 million people, the entire population of the U.S. prison system and the jail population of all the state, federal, local, every incarcerated person in the United States for any jurisdiction is only 1.9 million, okay? So imagine 13 million people here trying to deport them all at once, okay? Let's just take a look at some of the research that's been done by a number of organizations. It's going to cost objectively, it's going to cost trillions of dollars. And under the most expedited assumptions, it'll take hundreds of thousands of enforcers and take many, many years, okay? And to give you an idea back to the scale of this, okay, most of these illegals are in California, Texas, and Florida. One in every 18 people in Texas is illegal. You're going to kick out one in every 18, and that doesn't count their dependents and children. And they have businesses, okay, and spouses. So, and then it would deprive the United States of these illegal immigrants' contribution to our economy. They're making substantial payments to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, of which they don't get anything, okay, back. And kicking that will cause this mass disruption in labor markets, would cause a sharp and sudden increase in the cost of food and many other commodities. And as you were just talking about, a rise in grocery prices and inflation is one of the things that is highest on consumer and voter lists as things they're not going to put up with and things that they would use to vote against an organization. So if that happens, it's going to be a disaster for the Republicans. And according to numerous economists, okay, if we kick them all out in one operation, all 13 million of them, that would cause the U.S. GDP to drop somewhere between 7 and 9%, which is double or triple the size of the 2008 recession. I mean, that's how.
Wow.
It would all but cause a depression. Okay, so add that sudden, that I'm going to get the army and I'm going to go in and I'm going to it ain't going to happen. And he's also saying he's going to use the military to go in and do it. Okay, and let's take a look at that. Okay, there's this law called posse comitatus. Okay, it was a law passed. It's a 143-year-old law, and it was it had to do with the military interference in civilian affairs. And Congress passed this, and it basically says that you can't use the military to enforce civil law in the United States. It prohibits using soldiers rather than civilians in a posse. Okay, and it passed in 1878 at the end of Reconstruction, and it was designed to ensure that the federal military wouldn't be used to enforce Jim Crow and that sort of thing. And so numerous Supreme Court cases hold that the Posse Comitatus Act, the military cannot be utilized to or engaged in any way unless there is a mass violent insurrection. Deportation doesn't even begin to qualify. So add that he's going to use the military to engage in mass deportation. Chalk that up as yet another ain't never going to happen promise. Okay, and then I want to add one more here as a lawyer that just jumps out at me. Okay, Randy, I don't understand why more people are not talking about it. And I call this you can't send them here rule. Okay, under international law, I think everybody knows this. A person in one country, okay, cannot be deported by that country to another country without the permission of the country that's receiving the deportee. So neither Mexico nor Venezuela nor any of the other countries from whom most of these illegal migrants came from will likely accept the United States or will ever accept the United States dumping hundreds of thousands, in the case of Mexico, millions of now jobless persons, homeless dependents on their doorstep. Okay, the people we deport would need immediate housing, food, medical attention, jobs, none of which is available in these countries, even for the citizens there. Okay, so any large scale deportation operation, even ones vastly smaller than deporting 13 million people, would trigger an immediate financial crisis and humanitarian crisis, natural disaster in any country receiving these deportees. So obviously, these countries of origin of the immigrants are not going, they're going to refuse to accept any large number of deportees. And without their permission, help, and deep cooperation in these receiving countries, mass deportation is not only not legal, it's not even possible. So I don't hear people talking about this, that this is another reason why mass deportation just ain't going to happen. That's not to say, okay, that there won't be some small, loud deportation moves. But if they happen, they will happen. We should take note of how small they are relative to 13 million and watch how they immediately get tangled up in legal challenges and for years, okay? And then I want you to watch, this is really the most important part of it, the huge, painful, human, tear-jerking response that Americans are going to have, seeing long-time residents and their families being dragged from their homes and communities, forced to close their businesses, separated from family and friends and community. And as these heart-wrenching stories and scenes are played out nightly on TV, this whole operation will quickly become a public relations and political disaster, just like separating kids at the border did. And they stopped doing it for that reason. They'll stop doing this for the same reason. So let's not forget that cheap labor of migrants makes our food and other consumer items cheaper. We're all benefiting from that. We have all profited from their cheap labor. So when the prices of food and other commodities surge in response to these immigration raids, there's going to be a huge political price to be paid. Are they willing to pay that? I don't think so. Um, so you know the one thing that the MAGAs and Trump and they don't get, and that is that our economy is not a zero-sum game. Okay, when one person has a job, whether it's illegal or not, whoever has it, that doesn't mean that there's one less job for somebody else. That's one of the things that was discovered about machines that replace labor and computers that replace labor is that they end up creating more jobs than they replace. So one thing that we're all going to see here, and I submit to you that if and when people with jobs, and in many cases businesses and families, if they are thrown out of this country, even in relatively small numbers, we are all of us, going to suffer and lose. So now you've got a scorecard to keep track of all these promises that ain't going to be kept. Okay. And I fully expect as the push comes closer to shove and reality begins to make its way forward, okay, what we're going to see in the Trump administration is a backing away from many of these promises and a reducing, softening, or fuzzing up of a lot of them, okay? And that we're also going to see as we get closer to inauguration, the emergence of probably many interesting new promises that have not been made yet, okay? So what I propose, Randy, is that you and I reconvene here, and listeners, you come with us, so you come back in a month and join us again here, okay? And the second week of January, and let's take another look at the feasibility of these new promises, and based on what's emerged and the new promises, and examine how these original promises are holding up, okay? And to see if reality is finally making its way into the new administration. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. I hope you found this interesting. I hope it's a spoiler alert for people to know what's going to happen here. You'll appreciate that. And I want to see you all back here. Have a Merry Christmas. See you back here in a month. Thank you.
Well, I think we'll survive, Robert. It's second week of January would be very, very interesting. Today's events, I was looking up, FBI Director Wray is stepping down. He's decided he'd rather withdraw than get fired, even though he was put in place by Trump way back when. And the one thing that Trump got mad at him for doing was issuing the okay to go in and try to get our most secret documents out of Mar-a-Lago. Trump felt that that was wrong, that Director Wray shouldn't have done way back when, because,
The director of Ray didn't do it. The court did it. Department of Justice did it. A judge had a hearing on this and made a finding and signed it. It said there's probable cause that these documents are there. And lo and behold, I mean, they go into the bathroom and there's all these top secret documents stacked up. I mean, what? Obviously, there was probable cause for it, and that's one of the most extraordinary. I mean, my brother lives in Geneva, and my sister's up in Canada from time to time, and I have a niece in Denmark, and they're all contacting me. What the hell is going on with you? I mean,
well, the sad thing is that our own partners across the world, know that no secrets are, they don't have any ability. They're very non-trusting now of our, CIA and FBI, because they have, people and assets around the world, and they don't know, if that information is, can be found in your local bathroom anywhere in a major hotel. It just, it's just very, very sad. But
give them out party favors at Mar-a-Lago,
well,
take home some top secret documents,
yeah. Here, you can have an amendment. You can have an amendment. You can have a couple documents about our nuclear codes, and you figure it out. I mean, it's really a lot of fun pushing these buttons. And another article I read about, that every morning there is a security briefing given to the president, and they believe that any president, if a nuclear missile were to take off, he's got about at the most 20 minutes to react to what he wants to do. And of course, we know that in his first administration, they reduced that down to coloring books and pictures because he just wasn't interested in reading them. Couldn't they, you might want to know this, that if a missile flies in from North Korea today, that it's real, it is, yeah, I mean, and things as we say, things and items between now and then, we're going to see some interesting people go before the Senate to get confirmed. We've got the holidays in between, and hopefully everybody has a joyous and wonderful holiday. And I'm looking forward to the second week in January, Robert, and your insights, because if it wasn't real, it wouldn't be so funny. And it's funny, it's dark humor. And but it's just things that people believe that just ain't so. And I look forward to Robert Mills coming back to the second week in January. Robert, you and your family be safe and healthy. Have fun up in the mountains. I'm sure you're going somewhere, but have a joyous holiday. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. These are interesting times, and we're glad to be here. And anybody, I guess, can order out any amendment you want. Just go on Amazon and you can take your pick. So anyway, Robert.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Talk to you later.
Take care.
All righty. Good night. Mm.